Hello. In the tasting today, I'd like to have a look at a wine from Mount Etna. This is from a producer called Benanti. This is their Etna Bianco and the vintage is 2023. Now, Benanti are undoubtedly one of the leading producers of the Etna region of Sicily. The winery in its current form had its genesis in 1986 when Giuseppe Benanti took over a small farm where his grandfather had first planted vines back in the early 1800s and set about the process of rejuvenating it and renovating it as a winery. And I think the leading status that Giuseppe was to have in the region is perhaps demonstrated by the fact that when he took over this farm, there were something like 4 wineries on Etna, and today Etna is an incredibly fashionable place to be growing vines, making wines. And there are something like 130 wineries in the region now. It was in 2012 that Giuseppe handed over the reins of the winery to his twin sons, Antonio and Salvino. So the winery stays in family hands. And it's actually, in some ways, it's quite incredible that this has been such an influential winery in that they have only 14 hectares of vineyard, although those are spread out through the different terroirs of Mount Etna. And their winery is in a place called Via Grande. Generally, the winery specialises in making site-specific wines produced from the local grape varieties. In this case, a grape variety called Carricante, which is a variety which is pretty much only found in Sicily, and even then mostly on the slopes of Mount Etna. Now, the Etna Bianco is the winery's entry-level white wine, and therefore it's not actually site-specific. It's made from a number of different sites that are found both on the southern and the eastern slopes of Mount Etna. Now, these sites sit at altitudes between 700 metres and 950. So at 950 metres, some of the higher vineyards on the mountain, although the mountain will go up to 300 metres, vineyard isn't seen much above 1,000 metres on Etna. The soils here are sandy, volcanic, free-draining soils that have a high mineral content. The southerly location here means that there's good sunshine. However, the altitude at which these vineyards are planted gives a cooling effect. The maritime influence of the nearby sea gives both a cooling effect and also introduces humidity. At the same time, you get good airflow down the sides of the mountain, and as a result, there's a really high diurnal variation in temperature, so day-night temperatures can vary enormously. The warm days on one hand ensuring good ripeness in the fruit, and the cooler nights ensuring the preservation of acidity in the ripe fruit. The vines that produce the fruit for this wine are between 60 and 20 years old, so all of them fully mature with complete root extension. So they're going to be vines that are giving naturally lower yields of more concentrated fruit. Now, some of these are bush vines, trained albarello as the Italians would say, and others are trained on trellises to a cordon where they're spur pruned. Picking goes on quite late, it's hand picking, but this happens in the second half of October. The fruit's destemmed and gently pressed and goes for a 12-day fermentation in stainless steel tanks. Temperatures are regulated to 18 degrees C to prevent too vigorous a fermentation from stripping the aromas from the fruit. Benanti conduct all their fermentations with what are called autochthonous yeasts. So these are indigenous yeasts that have been selected, I believe, in the vineyard actually, and a culture has been produced for that. So although this is a wine whose fermentation is initiated with a yeast culture, that culture has been produced from a locally selected yeast type. The notes I have from the winery say that the wine has matured on its lees for some time, they say, without telling me what the time is. Now, given the fact that we're now in September 2024, and given the fact that once bottled, the winery states that the wine rested in their cellars for a further 2 to 3 months, I think we can probably say that it spent about 6 months aging on its lees. And this is a fresh sample that's only just arrived in New Zealand. So let's take a look at it, shall we? Looking at the colour, it's a pale to medium yellow. It's not particularly intense, it has a vibrancy to it. I'm swirling the wine there. It has 12.5% alcohol. It's not particularly throwing heavy tears on the glass. It is just starting to form some, but they're not particularly heavy and they're not particularly persistent. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There are some complex and enticing notes in there. You've got what is a very lifted, elegant peary note, in fact almost with a slightly confected pear drop estery note. But then there are some slightly high-toned floral perfumes as well, which I think are a slight extension of that. Sort of honeysuckle, that sort of quite rich perfume. Over the top of that I can see some really quite vivid saline notes, but then there are also sort of slightly sulphury notes of buck matches, wet stones, but they're only quite a delicate note in there. But certainly there's plenty going on. There are almost citric pith and lemon rind notes there as well. So let's have a taste. The wine is bone dry and there's a very lively acidity. I would assume the malolactic conversion's been prevented because there's underlying tartness to the acidity, but that's not really to the fore because a lovely creamy texture coating my tongue, giving this a mid-weight, and that's interacting with those sort of quite ripe, juicy pear notes that I was mentioning. Again, there's that slightly confected estery pear drop note on top of that as well, and following on from it, the acidity is starting to show itself more as that sort of citric, lemon pith, and with a slight sort of bitter oils note of lemon rind. The wine is leaving my palate really quite fresh, and for a wine that is a best mid-weight, it has quite a presence on my palate. I feel I should be mentioning more the saline note on the mid-palate, but although you can find it when you look for it, it's actually being overridden by the creamy nature of the lees on the mid-palate. This has a rounded, attractive, smooth textured fruit, and at the same time its lovely acidity would really help it in terms of pairing with food. I don't think it's a wine particularly to age, although given its intensity and its acidity, it would be absolutely fine to come back to in a couple of years. Now the Wine Searcher average score for this vintage of this wine is just 89, and I wonder if that's a little harsh actually. Although this is not a big, powerful, imposing wine, it has some real persistence, some lovely balance, there's some beautiful complexity in there. I think I would mark it slightly higher than that. I really do think that this shines out as being exceptional value for the money that you would pay for this. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be fantastic if you'd press the like button for us. We'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, the best answer of course is to sign up and follow our channel, and we'd really appreciate your support in that matter. But also if you do that, you can set yourself an alert and be notified every time we publish a new tasting. If you have any comments you'd like to add, do please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to this. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate that. Most importantly, however, do please try and make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.